If I were to tell you there's something out there that the majority of Americans believe is dividing our country, wasting our time, and spreading lies, you'd probably want us to get rid of it. You'd probably demand the problem get fixed immediately. You might even want someone to declare a national emergency. But what if I told you that something is social media? According to our latest NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, 57% of Americans say social media is doing more to divide us than unite us. 82% say it does more to waste our time than use our time well. 82%. And 55% say it does more to spread lies and falsehoods than news and information. So are Americans ready to give up Facebook or Twitter or Instagram? No. 69%, that's right, nearly 7 in 10 Americans say they still use social media at least once a day. They still use this toxic thing once a day. It's easy to recognize something may be bad for us. It's much harder to do something about it. With me now is Tony Rahm. He's an MSNBC contributor and a tech policy reporter for the Washington Post, been covering technology and tech companies for most of the past decade. Welcome. Nice to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
You know, Tony, the thing that struck me the most here, and as somebody who is absolutely a believer that social media has done more to destroy a lot of things that we have held near and dear to us. In our poll, Americans did separate social media from technology. There's been this perception that our anger at social media is engulfed in our anger at or fear of technology. That wasn't the case in our poll.
Yeah, it's much more nuanced than that. And the business models suggest that Facebook and Google are much different than companies like Apple and Amazon in the ways that they make money and the kinds of products that they put out. And the numbers really track with the series of scandals that we saw over the better part of the past year. Facebook sort of leads the way in terms of generating bad headlines. Right. We saw a number of incidents in which they misused people's private information, a number of cases in which Facebook hasn't really been held to account for some of those misuses here in the nation's capital. And so I think that's reflected in the fact that people are very unhappy with these companies, with social media companies, and what happens to their information.
We did ask some favorable ratings of these social media companies. I want to put them up. It was interesting here. It certainly was more negative for Twitter and Facebook, as you'll see here. But Google was still basically 3-1, 4-1 here, 63 positive, just 13 negative. Facebook and Twitter were more sort of dead even and polarizing. So as much as we don't like social media, it's not total anger yet. It's like us. We know smoking's bad, but we don't hate Marlboro yet, type of thing.
Yeah, and the addiction metaphor is an interesting one here because it's reflected in the fact that people
This feels like an addiction issue.
Yeah, and some people would say, there are experts out there now who are really thinking critically about the incentives that are baked into some of these platforms like Facebook that keep us coming back for more, that keep us logging on and surrendering our personal information. Yeah, these companies don't make money unless they have some of that data.
They're trying to keep you there. So if the whole goal is to keep you there, then of course it's an addiction.
Yeah, and on some level, they don't have to do very much. Remember, the reason...
Digital nicotine.
Yeah, the reason that Facebook is as big as it is right now, among many reasons, is that all of your friends are on there. And so you want to be the place where your friends are. And so that's also why, in some cases, it's very hard to quit some of these services because you're missing out on the things that your friends are saying and the things your friends are sharing. One
other thing we saw in here is that they don't think the federal government's doing enough to have oversight over the media. 54% are not satisfied, 36% are satisfied. What was interesting is Mark Zuckerberg has suddenly done a 180. He went from not saying this was a problem to now saying they're going to be care about privacy, and he's on a bit of a media tour. Here he is on ABC yesterday.
The current laws around what is political advertising don't consider discussing issues to be political. It's not clear to me that we want a private company to be making that kind of a fundamental decision about, what is political speech and how should that be regulated. That seems like something that there should be a more democratic process around.
All right, this frustrates me to all get out because Mark Zuckerberg is basically claiming that he does not have a responsibility that you at the Washington Post and I at NBC News have. And it just drives me batty. We are private companies, and we do face regulatory responsibility. We do have a responsibility not to proactively, for instance, if that killing video had been here, NBC would have been held accountable by the federal government. So I feel like he continues to want to believe he's not a media. He doesn't run a media company.
Yeah, that 180 you're talking about, though, is because Facebook has no choice here. We have lawmakers around the country who are talking about these things, including liability, and whether these companies, which have long been protected from that liability, a relic of the days when internet companies were much smaller than they are now, should continue to have that legal shield. In fact, there will be a hearing on this in the Senate just next week. But we even have the 2020 candidates talking about these things, which we hadn't heard before. Elizabeth Warren is out there talking about breaking up big tech companies. Amy Klobuchar is one of the bigger voices when it comes to the political ads that Zuckerberg talked about in that clip. So the interest among lawmakers is certainly much more heightened than it used to be. And it's even something on the campaign trail. We didn't see that in previous campaign cycles.
To go back to the addiction metaphor, 1964 is when the Surgeon General came out and said smoking was bad for us. You could make an argument. It essentially took us a generation to agree. Right? It really wasn't until the 90s that suddenly, oh, yeah, we shouldn't have smoking sections in restaurants, smoking sections on airplanes, things like that. This, to me, feels like the country now knows social media is bad, but we're addicted to it. Is it fixable, or do we just kick the habit and it just takes a generation?
Well, we've had some of those same warnings here, remember. We've been warned by the government about privacy and what happens when you surrender your data. We've been warned by report after report about disinformation online and the effect that Russian agents and other digital malefactors have on our conversation about politics. And now it's the question, what do we do? And there have been many efforts on Capitol Hill over the better part of the past few years that have intensified recently that just haven't gone anywhere. We don't have a federal overarching privacy law. We don't have something that says that every time Facebook makes a mistake on privacy, it's going to face tough fines. And so this is the question that's being put to Congress right now. Are they willing to turn that angst into something like regulation?
Oh, let me ask you this. I've been surprised I haven't heard somebody say we should have a privacy bill of rights. Right? I heard some chat about what would that look like? Is that like truth and algorithms? And what does it look like that the average Joe and Jane can understand?
Yeah, this has taken many forms over the year. President Obama back at the time was talking about a privacy bill of rights. That went nowhere. The idea was put out. He said that folks should know what's collected about them, have some sort of
I feel like it's
choice.
the Europeans that are doing more to protect your privacy and my privacy than the Americans.
Yeah, they're the world's privacy cops right now. They have the tough laws on the books that say you must give people choice over what happens to your data, and if you don't, we're going to hit you with huge fines as a result of that. And we've seen companies like Facebook and Google face investigations, but here the situation is much, much different.
How much more complicated, though, is it by our First Amendment?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about. With privacy, it's not in a lot of cases. Giving people the ability to know what's collected about them and say yes or no in response to that data collection is not something that's immediately implicated by the First Amendment. When you're talking about things like the terrible things that folks might share on social media, like hate speech, racism, things of that sort, the New Zealand video that you had mentioned,
right,
that's where things get complicated. That's why you've seen Australia, the United Kingdom, other countries looking at content restrictions when the U.S. isn't so much.
And obviously, if they do that, that might have more impact than anything we do here. Tony Romm, great conversation of the Washington Post. Nice to have you on. Much appreciated. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.